Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dragon Forged by Donna Grant, narrated by Antony Ferguson. Chapter 1. Last Days of Autumn, Iron Hall. Boredom had never been a good companion for Hector. He was a man of action and deed. Not that he didn't enjoy some downtime. After everything he and the other Dragon Kings had endured of late, a little respite was agreeable. But after a week of twiddling his thumbs, he was restless. He needed something to occupy him, and he wasn't due for his patrol rotation along the border for another 6 days. That was too long to wait. His boot heels thumped softly on Iron Hall's stone floors. The underground city was enormous, and every time they thought they had explored all there was to see, they discovered more. For the most part, the city had survived relatively well. However, some sections had some damage, or had even caved in, making them impassable. Hector had been exploring an area of devastation found weeks earlier. A few blocked corridors had already been cleared, but there was one he could focus on. He needed a project to curb his irritation and keep him from getting on anyone's nerves. He paused inside the atrium, finding Marcus where he had left him 3 hours earlier. Hector grinned as he took in his friend leaning on a table, staring at blueprints. Marcus was in his element, bringing the city back to its original glory, piece by piece, and he was doing a great job. Hector lifted his gaze to the arched dome ceiling, and the large white six-pointed star with its starry blue middle. Each of the points correlated to one of the 6 hallways branching off from the anteroom. The room was like every other part of Iron Hall, simple and elegant in its construction and decoration. A lot of emphasis had been placed in the atrium, which made everyone, especially Marcus, believe the entire area was important. The corridor Hector had just traversed connected a city wing to the antechamber. All 4 smaller flanking hallways had suffered damage, but the 2 closest to the corridor directly across from him had the most. Marcus specialized in architecture, every aspect of it. He had designed and built Dragon Manor, the distillery, and every other building on their estate in Scotland on Earth. Then he came to Zora to construct another manor at Cairnkeep, in the heart of Dragon Land, but his focus had since deviated to Iron Hall. Hector grinned and leaned a shoulder against the wall when he recalled how Marcus's eyes had lit up at the sight of the underground city. "Tell me again why you dunna just use magic to clear this last hall?" Hector asked, looking at the remaining blockage. Marcus didn't lift his head from the blueprints as he said, "That takes the fun out of it." This was far from Hector's idea of enjoyable. He was a warrior, a fighter. Give him wide-open skies and an enemy to vanquish over ruins to be put back together any day. He wasn't made to be stuck inside. Yet he never hesitated to lend a hand when needed, or when he had nothing else to occupy him. He pushed away from the wall and walked across the atrium to the blocked corridor. He saw only rocks and debris, but Marcus viewed things in ways no one else could. It was why building and rebuilding were his fortes. It was also why, if they wanted a spectacular meal, they turned to Keltan, who could make a feast out of nothing. If someone needed healing, Con stepped in. All the kings had unique skills, even him, though he wouldn't call his skill at battle all that special. He picked up battle tactics and fighting styles as easily as breathing. Sometimes he wished he had something more meaningful or fun. When the kings first came to Zora, all that mattered to them was the discovery of their dragons. Enemies had soon emerged, and it seemed they had been fighting one foe after another ever since. It kept them from exploring more of this new world than the bit of land the dragons had claimed. Most of the king's time had been spent at Stonemore, a mountainside city near Dragonland, where they'd fought multiple battles. From what the kings had seen of Zora so far, the realm was stuck in a medieval-esque era. Stonemore had many striking buildings, especially the palace at the very top of the mountain. They had glass windows, plumbing, and even heated water, yet they still used horses and carriages for travel. Iron Hall was different in more than its architecture. The stones used for the floor glowed from within, but not with magic. Sconces of flames that never went out hung along the walls. The aqueducts would have made the Romans weep with envy. Everything about the city, from the very design to the murals and lighting, made a person forget they were deep beneath the earth. Yet for all Iron Hall's wonders, they had yet to discover the builders. How long they might have lived here, or what had happened to them. He was beginning to wonder if they ever would. "The debris looks different in here," Hector called out as he walked to the entrance of the blocked corridor. "The floor tiles aren't cracked, they're smashed." He walked the last few feet into the hall where the rubble began. Squatting, Hector picked up a small piece of broken rock. The edges were burnt, as if from a blast of some kind. Or fire. He tossed the rock into the air and caught it. Scanning from one side of the wide passage to the other, he saw deep into the darkness beyond, as well as he would have if it were lit. His enhanced dragon senses stretched out, though searching for what he wasn't sure. Something wasn't right. It occurred to him that Marcus hadn't replied to his previous comment. He looked over his shoulder at his friend, whose dark head was still bent over the designs. "Did you hear me?" Hector asked. "What?" Marcus briefly lifted his head and speared him with a perturbed green gaze. "Of course." Hector grinned. "Did you know? What did I see?" "Fine, I wasn't listening. I have to—" Hector didn't wait for Marcus to finish, because he wouldn't. Whatever was going on happened inside Marcus's head and never made it past his lips. It was better to leave him to his musings, and only interrupt if it was life or death. Hector faced the debris field once more. The blackened stone bothered him. The few areas that needed work, like shoring up a few cracks, was nothing compared to this section or the two beside it. The hall was situated far from the city's main hub and only connected by the corridors, which explained why the damage was so contained. They hadn't discovered what it had been used for yet. It would likely take the reconstruction of the last hall before they could piece it all together. The other 4 hallways that branched off the atrium had 1 or 2 rooms along the sides, but all had a room at the end. Each was a different size and shape, with nothing inside that might tell them what it was for. Hector straightened and carefully picked his way around the rubble, moving deeper into the corridor. It led him to more scorch marks on the rocks littering the floor. That confirmed that something, or someone, had blown up this hallway, either by accident or on purpose. It would explain why the others had sustained damage. It wasn't long before Hector had to duck under the collapsing ceiling. There was no telling how much dirt was above him. With their magic, the kings could survive a cave-in, but others wouldn't be so lucky. He needed to mention that to Marcus, in case he hadn't inspected the areas back here. They needed to set up a barrier, at least to make sure none of the bairns accidentally found their way to this section. He reached a wall of rock, and was about to turn back when he spotted a small opening through a pile of rocks. He did a double-take and leaned to the side, trying to get a better look into the gap. "Fuck," Hector mumbled when he struck his head on a rock. The indescribable, overpowering need to see inside gripped him. Without a second thought, he dropped to his hands and knees to crawl around and over the large rocks. He cut his palms and arms numerous times on the sharp edges, but his body healed instantly. If it wasn't for Marcus, he would have already reached for his magic to clear his way, but he respected his friend enough not to do that. It took some time before Hector reached the cavity. His elation was short-lived. When he peered inside, he only found more debris. But even with nothing visible to his dragon vision, he couldn't turn away. The overwhelming need he'd felt earlier intensified, pushing him to investigate further. There was space enough for someone to stand upright, but beyond that was a solid wall of rock. He continued to scan the space, trying to decipher what had made him want to remain and get inside. The pull was so persuasive that he jerked away from the gap. Hector tried to leave but found he couldn't. He had to know what was inside that room. Something was in there and luring him. He looked down the hall to the antechamber and briefly thought about calling Marcus. As soon as the thought crossed his mind and passed, he realized he would have to share whatever he found. Hector was at the opening in the next heartbeat. He eyed the width and height, comparing it to his body. It would be tight, especially since he couldn't use magic. He stuck one arm through the gap and then squeezed his shoulder and his head inside. When he tried to pull himself the rest of the way through, he got stuck. He had to contort himself to get his other shoulder through. Dirt rained down around him, the ceiling groaning ominously. He flipped onto his back and stared above him, his magic at the ready, just in case. But it held. When he was sure nothing would fall, he pulled himself through the gap and got to his feet. He had to lean his head to the side so he didn't bonk it. Again. The room was about 8 feet square and, remarkably, didn't have as much debris as the rest of the corridor. Hector skimmed the walls and floors, trying to find what had drawn him in. He found himself turning left and walking toward a wall. He squatted and rolled away a rock the size of a beach ball, finding a slowly blinking turquoise light. The color was vivid, but not bright enough to sear his eyes. He reached for it before he could stop himself. Even as he made contact with the light, he tried to pull back. One moment, he was in the scorched corridor. The next, he stood in an all-white stone room. A salty breeze caressed his cheek as waves crashed against rocks nearby, and gulls squawked loudly. He turned his head toward the open window and the brilliant sunlight flooding through it. He moved toward it, only to spin around at the sound of an opening door. Hector found himself staring into vibrant blue eyes as bright as a summer sky. The woman drew up short at the sight of him. He shook himself, unsure if he was dreaming or if the stunning female staring back at him was real. For a moment, she so arrested him that he couldn't move. She had an oval face, a delicate nose, and a mouth that made him think of long nights with their bodies tangled in sheets. Her airy white dress was clasped at the shoulder with bands of leather, while a simple leather belt gathered the material against her waist, showing shapely curves, before stopping at her ankles to reveal leather sandals. Her blonde curls were gathered away from her face and hung past her shoulders, revealing darker strands underneath. Hector started to reach out to touch her, only to stop himself in time. He couldn't remember the last time someone had mesmerized him so. He had to know her, in every way possible. "Who are you?" he asked. As if his words had broken the spell between them, she shut the door behind her and hurried past him. "There isn't time. You must come with me now." He turned to her. "Just hold on a damn minute. You've no told me your name. I need to know how I got here. And where is here, anyway?" "I'll show you. Come," she urged as she motioned to another door he hadn't noticed. He hesitated, then sighed and trailed after her, moving through the doorway. Hector found himself in a narrow hall. "Can you at least tell me your name?" "All the answers are just ahead." Why wouldn't she give him her name? It irritated him. He intended to get it from her. He warily followed her, eyeing the doors on either side of him. Everything within him threw up red flags. His lips parted to pose another question when she halted and spun to face him. She barely spared him a glance, not even meeting his eyes. She hadn't been able to look away when she first saw him. Now she wouldn't look at him. What was going on? Hector dipped his chin and caught her gaze. She swung her attention to the opposite side. "Lass, what's going on?" "I'm sorry," she said. "Sorry?" he repeated. "For what?" She walked to the side, and he turned to face her. Her eyes briefly met his. Hector glanced down the hall in both directions. When he looked back at her, he noticed the pulse in her throat was erratic. "I'm no hearing any of those answers you promised, lass." "You will." Hector planted his feet, refusing to budge. "I think it's time for you to at least tell me your name." "I'm no one of consequence," she said. At the same time she reached around him and opened the door. He turned to see what was inside, not realizing he was so close to the threshold. He lost his balance and tumbled through the air. He was about to shift when he landed on the hard ground with a loud grunt. Hector rolled to a stop and gingerly sat up, his legs bent as he shook his head. The room was gone. Now he was in a field beneath a dazzling sun and big fluffy clouds. Hector scrubbed a hand over his jaw. There hadn't been any malice or anger in the woman's words, nor had she touched him. But there was little doubt she knew exactly what the door was, and that it would take him away. The problem was, why had she done it? He also had to figure out where he was. He couldn't see the door he had fallen through anywhere. He got to his feet and dusted off his hands. That's when he noticed the man leaning on a shovel, watching him. Chapter 2. The minute the Dragon King was gone, Amelia stumbled back a few steps, her knees threatening to give way. She braced her hands on the wall and dragged in huge mouthfuls of air. Her entire body shook from fear. Sweet silver sands, she couldn't believe she had faced a Dragon King and managed to get him out of Highvale without anyone knowing about his arrival. She stared at the open door, thinking he might reappear at any second, but she knew he wouldn't. He hadn't known where he was, which meant he might not return, unless he found the beacon again. Amelia couldn't move for several moments, as the sound of her breath filled her ears. Only when her breathing calmed did she lift her head. Her hands, however, still trembled. It was more about lying to the one person she didn't want to, but there was no other way. Her vision had been clear. If the Dragon Kings came to Highvale, a global war would decimate all of Zora. She swallowed and dropped her hands from the wall as she quickly closed the door before returning to the inner rooms. Unable to help herself, she glanced over her shoulder to make sure the door remained shut. She saw his face each time she blinked. Rugged, striking, handsome. The deep, earthy pools of his soulful eyes had seized her, making it difficult to breathe, much less think. She hadn't expected him to be quite so exquisite. He was tall, his power and authority resting around him as easily as the blue tunic he had worn over his impressive torso. Sunlight had lit upon his glossy, shoulder-length, light brown waves, and there had been a myriad of colors in that brief look. She had been so focused on his upper body that she hadn't paid attention to his lower half. Confusion had lined his brow, as well as a bit of curiosity. But no anger. He hadn't snapped at her or lost his temper, which was a good thing, considering he was so tall and commanding. Had he wanted, he could have snapped her in two, and yet he had easily followed her, which was only because she had rushed him while lying through her teeth. Luck had been on her side, thank the gods, and if the gods really were on her side, they would ensure that no other kings found their way to the city. Amelia released a sigh and walked through the room the Dragon King had appeared in. She shivered in remembrance of finding him standing there in his strange clothes. His accent had been different too. If she hadn't had the recurring vision about the kings, she would have welcomed him to the island and gotten to know him. But that was never meant to be. She drew up short for the second time that day when she walked out of the room and found Agate in the hall. Beautiful, wealthy, and captivating, she was everything Amelia wasn't. She was dressed in a gown of deep teal that showed off her curves. Dangling gold earrings glinted through her dark tresses. She also had a gold filigree belt at her waist and gold bracelets on each wrist. Agate was the epitome of wealth and position. Her waist-length brunette hair had been curled and held away from her face with gold clips. Something about Agate drew others to her like moths to a flame. The two of them couldn't walk anywhere without someone stopping them to speak to Agate. It wasn't Agate's fault. She just had an extraordinary spark that few others possessed. "Did it work?" Agate asked hopefully, her deep brown eyes wide with expectation. It was harder to lie than Amelia had thought. The words lodged in her throat. She couldn't even manage to shake her head. The tolling of the bells gave her a reprieve. "You're being called." "Frick," Agate muttered angrily, and whirled around to walk away. She halted after a couple of steps and looked back at Amelia. "Come with me." "You know I can't. I'm not part of the cabinet. You are a seer. Besides, it's high time those elitists realized you're being wasted in your current position." Unlike Agate, Amelia had never longed to go to one of the restricted meetings, take a seat at the table, or have her opinion counted. She preferred to remain unnoticed. "I'm not interested." "You could be a great asset." Agate had always championed her. Amelia wouldn't have her position in the Oracle Guild if it wasn't for her. She owed Agate for everything she had, but most especially for her friendship. Everyone wanted to be Agate's friend, and she was friendly with all, to the point where many believed themselves to be her best friend. The truth was, Agate simply didn't have it in her to correct them, and the only one she confided in was Amelia. "I'll change your mind someday," Agate said as she faced her. Amelia shook her head. "You won't. You keep saying that. Go, before they come looking for you." "Fine." Agate glanced at the door. "Will you remain to see if one of them comes?" Amelia's smile was tight. "Of course." "The summoning will work. You'll see," Agate said over her shoulder, and then hurried away. Amelia didn't move until she was out of sight. She put a hand on her stomach and bent over, nausea choking her. There was no way she could carry on without telling Agate the truth, all of it, including her vision. The weight of knowing what could happen had been a terrible burden. She hadn't, only because the visions urged her to remain silent. She straightened, walked to a column, and looked through the arch to the turquoise water surrounding the island. The skies were clear, the sea calm, but a storm raged on the horizon. The more magicals that found their way to Highvale, the more the stories spread of the horrendous acts done to their kind. Highvale was divided on whether to remain only a safe place for the persecuted or create an army and wage war. Agate and others on the cabinet believed the Dragon Kings would ensure victory for all magicals. Amelia's visions, which had been on repeat since she was young, said differently. She looked down at the streets of Highvale and those going about their days. The only way to find the hidden city was with magic. A few humans had managed to locate the island, but finding it and getting to it were two very different things. Only those with true magic could cross from the mainland. It was a refuge, a haven for anyone tired of hiding their abilities. Everyone could be themselves at Highvale, in whatever way they wanted. Agate had been brought to the island as an infant and raised here. Amelia hadn't been that fortunate. Her parents had loved her, and she them. When they realized she had magic, they tried to hide it from others in their settlement. There was no controlling when a vision came, though, nor could it be hidden. The hardest thing she had ever done was leave them after she had a vision of their violent deaths at the hands of those in their village. She was only 5. She had seen herself at Highvale in the vision and set out to find it. It had taken her months to reach the island, but she had been welcomed as everyone was. She loved much about the city, but like everything there were issues. Money, power, and position played into everything, as did politics. The more divided Highvale became about the war, the more the rumbles of unrest could be heard among the citizens. The island was a powder keg waiting to explode, and the Dragon Kings were the match. Amelia straightened from the column and made her way down the hall. A gentle breeze swirled around her as it moved through the open windows on either side of her. She yearned to go down to the shore for a swim, but that would have to wait until she finished her chores. As part of the guild, she had to earn her keep. There were only 2 guild houses now, oracles and banshees. There used to be others, but those involved either couldn't or wouldn't meet the directives and duties required. The guilds eventually faded. Being accepted into the guild could be exhausting. Everyone wanted to be at the top, but not everyone could be. Many didn't like having to climb their way up, or the menial chores that went with it. But there were also advantages. Amelia didn't have to worry about shelter, food, or clothing, as all were provided. Being in the guild also granted the members a certain level of respect. While Amelia was low in the guild, she ranked much higher among the regular citizens. With that position and power came political ties. Each guild had its own, as everyone would expect. Because the guilds were so prestigious, each held 3 seats on the cabinet, and the guild members were elected solely by their houses. It was how Agate had gotten into the cabinet. Beside the 6 guild members, the entire island voted to elect 3 representatives who led the cabinet. The candidate with the highest votes out of the 3 governed the cabinet. With so many at the table, there were many meetings to debate and vote on any number of things, if they got anything done at all. Agate often claimed they did nothing but bicker during the 2-hour assemblies. Things did get accomplished, but slowly, or at least that had been the case until recently. Newcomers to the island, or those who had left and returned, brought tales of dragons leaving their lands and battling others. Several had witnessed a dragon shifting into a man or vice versa. It had sent a shockwave of hope throughout Highvale that Amelia had never experienced before. All the years of having the vision should have prepared her, but she kept hoping it would never come to pass. Yet with the stories, her recurring vision of destruction and devastation, where everything was on fire and dragons roared around her, came more often. It was how she'd known a king would arrive soon. She went down the stone steps, pausing to look over her shoulder. If one king had found the portal, another might as well. It hadn't been Providence that she'd happened to be there when the Dragon King appeared. The vision had visited her 5 nights in a row, which had never happened before, so she took it for the warning it was. Agate spoke often about the magic the cabinet used in their attempt to summon a dragon. It was the only way Amelia had known where he might appear. That's when Amelia offered to keep an eye on the room. She felt bad for using Agate, but in the end, what she was doing would save countless lives. If Agate ever found out, hopefully she would forgive her. Amelia could weather a lot, but she wouldn't survive losing her one and only friend. Because Agate was more than that. She was also Amelia's family. The only way to stop another king from being summoned would be to shut off the beacon. Unfortunately, that went beyond her abilities. Only the cabinet could do that, and they wouldn't change their minds any time soon. Amelia sighed and faced forward once more. The Dragon King's features flashed behind her eyelids when she blinked. It was a face she wouldn't soon forget. Chapter 3. Hector looked around as he crossed the field to the man. There wasn't another soul in sight. The land was flat, with only a couple of trees dotting the horizon. The man made no move to meet Hector. He wondered if the stranger had seen how he had come to be there. More worrying was if the man would be threatened about the possible use of magic. Yet the gentleman smiled as Hector drew closer. If he feared for his life, he likely wouldn't have stuck around. Still, Hector wouldn't take any chances. He'd already been duped once today. It wouldn't happen a second time. Hector nodded in greeting. "Hello." "Hello yourself," the man replied congenially. By his response, he didn't seem afraid or irritated. That eased some of Hector's worry, but not all. "I do not suppose you could tell me where I am." "Seems someone such as you should know that." "Aye, I should." Hector halted about 6 feet from the man. "Unfortunately, I do not." The male was short, the top of his head barely reaching Hector's chest. He had white hair sticking out from beneath a wide-brimmed straw hat. Sharp gray eyes scrutinized him. The sleeves of his beige linen shirt were rolled up over his elbows, and faded blue suspenders held up his dark brown trousers. The height and the shovel brought to mind Derek's description of the Tomti, a race of individuals inexplicably drawn to crops who were invisible to those without magic. "I know what you are, Dragon King," the stranger said. Hector dipped his chin. "And I know what you are, Tomti." Suddenly his mouth split into a wide...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?